Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we're talking about grief, creativity, your business, how to get back on track after life slaps you in the head and knocks you off a ladder and throws you into a pit and starts to bury you alive. And if that sounds like hyperbole, you just wait for what we're discussing today. We have with us Dr. Sherry Welling, who is an author, podcaster, therapist, all kinds of good stuff. And we're talking about the death of loved ones. So it's going to be a rough episode. Buckle in. Dr. Sherry Welling, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here.
It's going to be exciting. Now, I was suggesting something, a mindset I have around death before we hit record here about the idea that in grieving, that going through the point of maximum pain or trying to go when you have a decision between different choices after a serious loss, which in my case is my daughter, in your case, your father and your brother, that I heard from a friend, you should try to do what's going to hurt the most, go for the point of maximum pain. And you thought about it and you said you had reservations. And then we hit record. So tell us, Sherry, why is choosing the most painful path not always the best idea?
I think grief is a long story. When you love someone and lose them, that becomes part of you and it stays with you really for the duration of your life. So grief doesn't need to be a high adrenaline sport. Like it can be a thing that you at times walk towards the very deepest, hardest moments. And at times you just sort of like pull the covers over your head and like watch Netflix and like just be. You don't have to actively run towards the pain. I think if you are sort of brash in your willingness to go through the depths, you can like fatigue yourself in a process that really is going to last for the rest of your life.
Let me amend my statement that I made earlier, which is I don't always go for the point of maximum pain. It's at certain, what feels like pivots or certain, it's like there's junctures where you could attempt to hide and avoid your suffering, or you could look it in the face. And sometimes there have been that I've seen the path in the road, I've seen the fork in the road.
Yeah.
Where I could, like I was sharing with you the story that at my daughter's memorial, that we had my cousin who was running the thing read a poem that I wrote my daughter the day that we got home from the hospital. And that was horrible, but it was also very good. And I occasionally look through the program 7 months later and I think, wow, yeah, all these people that were there. Great, I'm already starting to cry and we're like 2 minutes into the episode. I know that all these people who are there, they have this with them and they have this tiny little slice of my daughter with them. And that's all we get. But I did share that and it feels good looking back.
Yeah, I think that moments when we choose to really go in and through, there's not much point. Well, let me say it a different way. I think it is so much energy to try to hide, avoid, numb, repress, deny. That is not something I recommend or practice myself. But the sense of eyes wide open, of being really clear about what's painful, what loss has cost you, and I use this language of developing a relationship with it, right? Sometimes you're dancing with it closely. Sometimes it's top of mind and right in front of you. Other times it's more of a distant relationship, but it's ever present.
Yeah, I was narrating some voice notes for my book this morning on this experience and on loss. And what came to mind was that, and I'm writing this for fathers that have lost children, that emotional resiliency is now a question mark every day. Whereas in general, a lot of guys pride themselves, definitely including myself, on being balanced and strong and tough. That now, some days I'm like that. And some days my pool of emotional resiliency feels as strong as it ever was. And then other days or other moments in time, I am one thought or one song lyric or something away from being like I was, let's see, as recently as driving to Home Depot yesterday, I was listening to some song and it was a Macklemore song about something completely unrelated. I just started crying in the car driving to Home Depot. And the whole experience of you're driving to a store and you notice you're just crying, but not so much you have to pull over. And you get to the store, you wipe off your tears, you wait 30 seconds, then you go shopping. And you're like, yeah, everyone who looks at me like, wow, this person was just crying and that's just your life. Like that's what my life is right now. And it just is.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're talking about this as a business owner, because I think a lot of the entrepreneurs that I talk with, that I work with, they're in the business of making and creating and building and growing and pushing forward. And it's a very active life, energetically active, right? You're always like doing something. And I think that most entrepreneurs, and maybe even more so most men, find that they don't have a lot of space or don't have a lot of permission to make space for grief, for the like shadowy, painful part of life. And it feels really important that you're so open to hosting these conversations.
Yeah, I live in the mindset. I lived in the mindset, maybe both, I don't know. And not that this is a factually true thing, but it is a vibe true thing that things don't happen to me, I make things happen. And a lot of entrepreneurs live in that world. That's what works for them. A lot of men do. And it is great to live in that world. It really helps give you this energy to ignore reality and make reality, to bend reality to your will, that kind of concept.
Yeah.
And it's great, man. It's wonderful. And then on rare occasion, something happens to you, like, oops, your daughter just died. Like, that's not a thing that I made happen. That's a thing that happened to me. And there's no amount of Norman Vincent Peale or Tony Robbins that can overcome the fact something just happened to me. And now I'm left to figure out, well, now what? That how am I going to go care about things like websites or writing emails or eating food? Any of these things that are completely irrelevant now.
Yeah.
I just don't care anymore. And how to come back to any kind of sense of purpose, especially if you're the breadwinner for your family and doom occurs. And I like, what am I going to do about that? Because checking out won't work.
I think it really is an existential dilemma of confronting the illusion of your control. And as an entrepreneur, you can't really live in a world where you don't feel the agency of control. Like you kind of have to speak up the illusion in your own mind and in your own life to believe in your own volition and your own capacity to make things, to be a world builder. But in some ways, none of that is true because, as you know, and as I know, and as many know, if you scratch below the surface a little bit, all manner of things are possible that are outside of our control or our choosing. And the wrestling with the limits of what we actually have the power to protect and contain and control can be really, really disruptive and sort of undo someone's worldview if they don't engage the question and wrestle with it until they find their way to the other side of it, sort of a new worldview or a new way of thinking or feeling about their own ability to make things happen in their lives or to craft the world around them.
How much latitude do you have in your narrative before it breaks, is what you're making me think of. That we all know people that have a very robust narrative that it's the person going for one rep max at the gym. Yeah, but if something changes and they get out of their lane, they have a spoiled day. When I was, I don't know, 13 maybe, there was a Boy Scout event where at the last minute they changed location, I think, and I was having a cow and I didn't want to go. And there's only one other scout going anyways. And there's all these issues in which resulted in me just being pissy, just an emotional 13-year-old boy. And I didn't have any resiliency in that moment to say, oh, my plans have changed. This is happening in a different location. That's okay. Just didn't have the resiliency. And so I had a cow and threw a fit. Not very impressive in teenagers, disastrous in adults if we let it get out of hand.
I do think resiliency isn't like instantaneous, though. Resiliency usually develops after some sleepless nights and after some difficult days. So maybe not quite a tantrum in an adult, but certainly some anguish. And I think we build our way into resiliency over time, over thought, over, and, it usually involves some kind of community. It usually involves getting up and trying again. But it's not something that we can snap our fingers and be like, oh, something terrible happened to me. Let me apply resilience and off we go. I say that because I feel like people rush to that word a little bit too quickly. And, don't get me wrong, like very pro resiliency, as a parent, as a psychologist. I definitely believe that all manner of things can be recovered from and that people can bounce back in amazing ways. But my fear is that people skip over the grief. They skip over the difficulty in the name of resiliency. It can be a little bit of like spiritual bypassing. You skip around the hard stuff.
You've dropped so many book titles in just this episode that now you have to go write yet another book. It's a tough life. But that spiritual bypassing feels like a good title for a book. Have you read Bearing the Unbearable by John Cassitore?
I have, yeah.
A friend gave me that book a week after my daughter died. I didn't read that or anything else for 3 months afterwards, and I finally opened it up. And of all the books I've now read, that was the best. I've not read any of your books yet. I should probably get on that. But one of the things that Cassitore said is that your ability to cope is somewhat under your control. How hard each day is going to be is not under your control. And so if you just build up your ability to cope to be like an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 on a consistent basis, you'll still have days that are 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 for how powerful your grief is, and you just get knocked on your butt and you can't do anything. But they'll be less often than if you don't build up your ability to cope. And this idea, until I came across that concept, my mindset was more along the lines of healing. And once I came across her concept, it was so obviously true that no, there's no healing here. No, that's not happening. What's happening here is my ability to perform each day and do what I must do each day depends on my ability to cope. And that reframe was so good for me because it was sort of, it felt like giving up on an impossible quest. Because how do you recover from your child dying? How do you heal? Like, no, it's just, I have an ability to cope each day. It depends on the minute what's happening. And there's some things that tend to increase that, like, did I sleep last night? Am I eating good food? Am I moving sometimes? Am I being connected with friends and family? And there's some things that tend to lower my ability to cope, like not eating good food, sitting on the couch, staying up late, watching too much TV, staying isolated. And that's the story every day is I show up and hopefully I did enough things the night before and the morning of to increase my ability to cope. Like this last night, I went to bed pretty early. This morning, I got up and went to the gym and I ate some real food today. Okay, I've set myself up for some success today. Today might still turn into a terrible day, Sherry. I don't know. It's only 11:47 my time, but I've set myself up for success. So it's more likely I'll be able to continue to produce throughout the day. I'm curious from your perspective, that whole ability to cope, what's your take on that?
Well, I think coping looks like a lot of different things. So you ended your statement there by talking about your ability to produce for the day.
Yeah.
I might wiggle that a little bit and say that there's a whole range of things that we can call coping. Sometimes it means business as usual. Sometimes it means going about our workday, our professional lives as maybe on paper we would plan or we would have decided to do. But coping can also look like the clear decision to deviate from business as normal and say, you know what, today is a grief day. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to adjust my schedule. I'm going to spend more time with my loved ones or with my animal, or I'm going to sleep late. So the coping is really applying the correct resource in the correct amount to kind of compensate or make up some of the distance that pain has left emptiness. So when the bucket is empty, we apply coping to fill the bucket. But we can do that in lots and lots of different ways. There's not just one way of coping, and coping is definitely not just business as usual, getting the productivity in.
I'm thinking about what you're saying and about how some days I do a schedule and have for a long time where I do almost all my calls on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then I do the podcast on Mondays. And that's my world. And so I have very long days on Tuesdays and sometimes on Thursdays. So, but I have these breaks. So I have this like barbell approach to my work life where if I have a grief day on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, okay, I only got, one call, if that, probably, unless it's a podcast recording day. If it's a Tuesday and I wake up and I'm like, nope, I just want to go back to sleep. The answer is no. I'm not going to reschedule 8 or 10 clients. Like, it's just not happening. It's too expensive unless I was to a level like physically vomiting and unable to function at all. I think I've canceled a Tuesday like once, besides the immediate aftermath of my daughter dying. I'm going to show up. I have to, I feel like. So it's the other days where I give myself more space to go see, well, where am I actually?
So you're dosing your coping, right? You're pacing it. So you can say, okay, Tuesday, I have to like dig down deep and just get shit done. And then maybe on a Wednesday, I can take it easier. I can give myself the space to rest from the amount of lift and energy and push that it took to do Tuesday, despite having a broken heart.
Yeah, and it's dosing throughout the day as well is interesting. If you have a day where you're in calls from say 8:30 in the morning and your last call ends at 4 p.m. and you have a half hour that you're not on the phone or on Zoom or also maybe presenting a webinar to a lot of people, how do you show up at work at the start of the day, but not in such a fashion that you don't show up for your last call of the day? Because that also doesn't work.
I think for me, one thing that's been really important is that I really love my work, and my work is really to be of service to other people who are in the midst of their own storms, whatever kind of storm that is. And so sometimes my work is a really lovely break from my own grief because it is a time when it really isn't about me. It is not about my emotional reality. It is about my focus and attention and listening to my client's reality in that moment. So I can't live there all the time. Then I would never create space for my own emotional reality. But sometimes coping is also like putting your stuff on the shelf and really focusing and diving into the work that's at hand. That can also be a lovely break from the weight of grief. I think sometimes in the aftermath of loss, it's such a difficult dance because we live in a culture that, you know, people bury their mother on Saturday and they're back in the boardroom on Tuesday. There's no space for grief. So I'm of both minds at one time, which is that most people in their professional lives need more space than is usually given. But also, just because someone has experienced a loss doesn't mean that they need to be benched. Sometimes they need to be in the game, they need to be in their work because that is where they can sort of put the energy or the fuel that grief has given them. I think the bottom line is that there is no one size fits all. There is no handbook for grief, and there's no handbook for even specific kinds of grief. And the thing that makes grief difficult is that it is a deep invitation to be so self reflective that we are clear about what we most need. And then we are our own advocates in developing those coping resources, whether that's support from others, whether it's time off, whatever it may be for us.
Sherry, I feel like we could talk for hours and days about these topics. But for the folks listening here, I want to mention your books, which folks you can find at sherrywalling.com. You got Touching Two Worlds, and then you have Keeping Your Shit Together. That's your business book. Who are these books for? Who should go pick these up?
Yeah, the Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together is a kind of like mental health 1-on-1 or 101 for entrepreneurs. So it's super handy. I think it's really for anyone who's trying to do something difficult in their lives and they need some language around mindset. They need some language around early life stories, personality traits. It's a book I'm really proud of. I think it's really handy and helpful. And then Touching Two Worlds is the book that I wrote about grief. It's really for a broader audience than specifically for entrepreneurs, but it's for anyone who is living in the shadowy part of grief and also very much alive, very much like raising kids, building businesses, just like engaged in the world. So, Touching Two Worlds is this idea of needing to kind of be in two realities at one time and to find some comfort in being able to move back and forth between those realities.
Well, those books both sound very useful to me in specific. Let me end here with a question, which I want you to give us the question. For anyone listening who is experiencing some kind of loss in a way that they're carrying with them, what is a question that a person can ask themselves as they're trying to navigate taking care of themselves with being productive in their business?
Well, I think another point of balance I might add to that equation. So you're aware of grief, you're aware of productivity. Most of those things are fueled by joy. So I would be curious, or I would want this person to be reflective around, where can joy fuel me? Where can joy give me the strength and energy to get out of bed on a grief day? Where can joy give me the focus and energy that I need to be productive? So finding the places of joy can be the counterbalance to grief, certainly, but can also be the fuel for what you want to accomplish and do in your life. So, where is the joy? Where can there be more joy?
That's beautiful. Sherry, thank you for being on Redbeard Radio.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.